I actually felt bad a little bit, for making that comment, but I stand by it. I predicted that CM Punk would be the biggest financial flop in wrestling history, and it turned out to be true. That really, really sent me over the edge because Tony Khan, to this day, has no idea why WCW failed to be successful in Turner Broadcasting. He has no idea.
I want people to understand and to know, and I want to be able to understand, what does an EVP do? Because AEW has 3 EVPs, and I have no idea what is their job.
Then I saw him wrestle. It's like, what the hell? This guy worked. I mean, he looked like he'd been in the business for 10 years.
Wow.
He was phenomenal.
We are here with the only person that has made Vince McMahon really fear for his job, Eric Bischoff. Eric, thank you so much for being here with us. And say hi to everybody in Latin America, everybody in Spanish speaking that we're in our podcast. And say hi to everybody so we can have our great conversation here.
Hola, I wish I was fluent in Spanish and I could do this in Spanish with you. I feel badly that I don't speak the language, but I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation.
You don't have to worry about it, Eric, because we will have this interview up and we will have it in subtitles in YouTube. So they're going to understand everything that you say. So we're just going to wail away. And I want to start with something really, really interesting because it involves you, but it was something that I did, right? So I don't know if you remember, let's go all the way back to 2022, a little bit after we actually had a conversation around WrestleCon in Dallas. We had the media scrum for AEW Double or Nothing, right? And a reporter, let's call him a reporter, it was actually me. I asked a question to CM Punk about a quote that you said. And the quote was that you said that CM Punk was the biggest financial flop in wrestling history. And after I asked that question, Tony Khan just lost his mind. He's like, this effing guy right here, this is BS. And he went off, and that was basically the start of all of the media scrum drama. And it was me that actually asked the question about a quote that you said, of all things. So now that I have you here, what do you think about all that and how that just blew up? And then after that, media scrum after media scrum, it was just must see internet TV, right? With AEW. So what do you think about that, man?
It's unfortunate, I think, more than anything, because it certainly didn't do CM Punk any good. It certainly didn't do Tony Khan or AEW any good. In general, it was a black eye on the professional wrestling industry. So it wasn't a good thing at all. And I actually felt bad a little bit, for making that comment, but I stand by it. I predicted that CM Punk would be the biggest financial flop in wrestling history, and it turned out to be true. Tony Khan spent a lot of money on CM Punk to damage his brand, and we all know how that story ended. CM Punk is no longer part of AEW. AEW is suffering to a degree as a result, and it was a bad investment, pure and simple.
Yeah, because and even though what you said was true, when you look at it, he was also one of the few, if not only, person that was really drawing some kind of attention, and when it came to ticket sales, for example. And right now they're suffering a lot with that, right?
Well, and I think that's one of the things that's so disappointing is that the potential, CM Punk, I don't have anything against CM Punk at all. I've never met him. We've never had a conversation, but I'm the first one to recognize that there was a lot of value in CM Punk when CM Punk left WWE and he spent a little bit of time in the UFC, more time than he should have, evidently. but CM Punk was able to maintain his mystique. There was still a lot of interest, a lot of value in CM Punk. When CM Punk came to AEW initially, I was excited for AEW because of the potential that CM Punk represented for AEW. But unfortunately, right away, CM Punk lost a lot of respect as far as I was concerned, because one of the first things he did to try to establish himself with the audience and get over, as they say in the business, with the audience, was to take shots at Hulk Hogan, to compare himself to Scott Hall and Kevin Nash when they came into WCW and created the NWO. Completely unnecessary. Yeah, especially with regard to, criticizing Hulk Hogan. And I'm not here to defend Hulk Hogan. There are many things that one could criticize about Hulk Hogan. None of us are perfect, especially none of us who have spent as much time in the public eye as Hulk Hogan has. But to try to get yourself over by criticizing someone that you don't even know, that you've never worked with, I thought, to me, revealed a weakness in CM Punk's game. And I lost a lot of respect for him for that. And then as time went on, probably because I felt the way I felt and had lost respect for him, I was fairly critical of him. But I think a lot of that has to do with the way CM Punk was managed. And some of that responsibility has to fall on the shoulders of Tony Khan, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate because also with him, for example, him taking shots at Hogan, and regardless of what you hear or read about Hulk Hogan online, he was one of the people that changed the business. You know what I mean? And he is one of the greats of professional wrestling, especially when he took WCW with the NWO and everything with yourself and the Outsiders, and they really changed the business for the better, right? It became cool to watch wrestling in the 90s. I'm a 90s kid, so I understand how that is, and taking the shots at Hogan that way, it seems kind of, it's like you haven't done what Hogan has done in wrestling when it comes to drawing power, box office, merchandise, and you want to take shots at Hogan. I can see where, you know, same thing with Tony Khan when he says that we're not going to make the same mistakes as WCW made, right? And you yourself, you could advocate for everything that happened in WCW. You were there. You made WCW beat 83 weeks in a row WWF, right? But it wasn't just 83 weeks. If you look at it from hindsight and look at the back, it was 1 week you guys, 1 week them, and things like that. When that whole time period, it was not just 83 weeks. So I feel like that is kind of where Punk is kind of off when he was just throwing shots at things, and Tony Khan himself too, throwing shots at the things that you guys accomplished, especially with WCW.
Yeah, I think with regard to Tony, and look, I don't hold this against Tony. Tony is young. He's learning on the job. Tony had never been in the professional wrestling business before. He invested a lot of his own money. He's very emotional. AEW is his child, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So I get passion, right? But one of the things that caused me to lose some respect for Tony was nothing he said about me. There's nothing Tony Khan could ever say about me that hasn't been said often before, right? And I have very, very thick skin. It takes a lot to get under my skin. But I'm also loyal to a fault. Loyalty is one of the characteristics in people that I admire the most, that I respect the most. And it's also one of the things when I see someone that demonstrates a lack of respect, it's also one of the things that pisses me off. And Tony came out in an interview, and I think it was the same interview where he said he wasn't going to make the same mistakes that WCW made, which I found laughable. But he said if Ted Turner knew 1% about the wrestling business as I do, I meaning Tony Khan,
Mm-hmm.
maybe WCW would still be around or something to that effect. That really, really set me over the edge because Tony Khan to this day has no idea why WCW failed to be successful in Turner Broadcasting. He has no idea. The only thing that Tony Khan knows is what he's read in dirt sheets like Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer and from other people who also weren't there.
Or WWE documentaries, basically.
Yeah, I mean and to disrespect Ted Turner like that really bothered me because Tony Khan wouldn't have the opportunity Tony Khan has today were it not for Ted Turner. Tony Khan wouldn't have the opportunity at Turner Broadcasting were it not for the success that WCW had.
Correct.
So to be as disrespectful, not so much to me, but to Ted Turner, who I have the utmost respect for, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today were it not for Ted Turner. Ted Turner changed the lives of a lot of people for the better and created a lot of opportunity for people. And to disrespect that was borderline unforgivable. Now, I've forgiven Tony for saying it because I understand it. I can put myself in his shoes, but it's hard. It's hard.
And sometimes I feel like wrestling fans in general too, not only, Tony, because it's sad to say you have to see Tony as a wrestling fan, right? Because of all the things that he does. And you've seen how he's been in Twitter for the past few weeks, especially the past week, right? I guess they forget that with WCW in general, me that I lived it. Like I was watching WCW at 6:05 on TBS on Saturdays with my mother, right? You know what I mean? Like it was different times. It was not everybody just thinks it's just Nitro and Raw, and there was there's a couple of years way before Nitro and Raw where it was WWE Superstars and 6:05 on TBS. Saturday night's main event, right? Was it?
WCW Saturday night was
WCW Saturday night.
Yeah,
Yes.
main event was on Sunday.
Yeah. So they forget that was also numbers where even the Saturday show that WCW had was doing raw numbers on a Saturday at 6:05. You know what I mean?
That's something, honestly, Mike, I'm glad you brought that up because I just discovered that a couple of months ago. I went back and I was looking at WCW's ratings before Nitro and was surprised when you looked at the Monday Night Raw ratings and you looked at WCW Saturday Night ratings. There was not that much of a disparity. We were fairly close. And of course, when Nitro came along, we were competitive immediately. Well, the first week, they were preempted the first week. But even after the preemption, the first week, when we were head to head, now this is before the NWO, because everything changed with the NWO, of course. But even before the NWO, Nitro would win one, WWE would win one. WWE would win two, Nitro would win two. We were very competitive from the very beginning. And of course, when the NWO happened in 1996, that became the 83-week one, where 83 weeks straight. I think in total, we probably defeated, when we were in head-to-head competition while I was there, well over 100 times.
Yeah, of course.
But it was 83 weeks straight that I named my show after.
Now, with that being said, the big change happens when you become the EVP of WCW, right? Is that where the big, because I want to ask you this question because I want people to understand and to know, and I want to be able to understand, what does an EVP do? Because AEW has 3 EVPs, and I have no idea what is their job. That's the job title, and we're talking about the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, and you were an EVP in WCW and a producer and a lot more things, but I want to understand, and I want my viewers to understand, what does this entail? Because it's just mind-boggling when I just, you hear the things and the things that you read and you just see them wrestle, but you don't know what they're actually doing as EVPs. Can you help us out with that?
I can't because I have no idea. You know, let's kind of back up. My first promotion in WCW, I was an announcer
Mhm.
and a third string announcer. I was the backup to the guys that were really doing the work that people saw most often.
Mhm.
But excuse me, promoted to the title and responsibility of executive producer. Now, as executive producer, I was in charge of all the aspects of physical television production, the location of choosing the venues, deciding where we wanted to produce our shows. I was in charge of the lighting, the editing, the graphics, the audio. Everything involved with the physical production of the show was my responsibility. I wasn't involved with talent. I wasn't involved with creative. I simply was involved with the physical production of the show. At some point, shortly thereafter, because I was promoted very rapidly a number of times, sometime probably 6 months or 8 months later, I was promoted to vice president. As vice president, my responsibilities grew and I had more influence. I still wasn't making the final decisions in creative or with regard to hiring or firing talent, but I was involved more in the discussion. So my voice or my opinion carried a little bit more weight than it did when I was only in charge of the physical production of the show. Sometime after that, I was promoted to senior vice president. And at that point, I believe at that point, I was then involved with hiring and firing talent, managing the talent roster, managing the budget for the talent roster. So my responsibilities increased. And then ultimately I was promoted to president where I oversaw every aspect
Everything.
of the WCW business. That was my role. But I think your listeners need to understand that in every corporation, those titles can mean different things,
The
right?
responsibilities could be different.
Oftentimes, for example, in the television or movie business, the executive producer title, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes, is more of a vanity title, meaning someone may have had some involvement, and usually it's, especially with the film industry, usually that relates to finding the funding to produce the project. So someone who is able to raise the funds, to find the financing, to finance a movie project will often get the title executive producer. They have nothing to do with writing, casting, distributing,
Or
any of the physical
they fund it
production.
themselves just to have the title in there.
Yeah, yeah, they get their name in the credits and it makes them
Mhm.
feel good. In television, that is also the case. Sometimes where if you're involved, if someone is involved, let's say I know this guy named Mike and he's Hispanic and he's got a large Hispanic following on his YouTube channel. He's a wrestling fan. And I think he'd be really good in a small role in a movie. And I get him that role in the movie. And I know this other guy over here who's a big star. And I was able to convince him to be a part of that movie. And oh, I know a great producer who's really good at putting all the pieces together and actually delivering the product to a studio. If I put all of those pieces together, then I'm an executive producer. But all I've really done is manage the pieces and put it together. I'm still not really involved with the physical production or the writing or the scripting or anything like that, or casting for the most part. Now, as far as what the EVPs or the executive vice presidents do in AEW, I have no idea. It may just be a vanity title, which is often the case. In lieu of giving someone money, sometimes you give them a great title because it makes them feel good. So I don't know. Perhaps, you know, the Young Bucks have more responsibilities that I'm just not aware of, or as fans we're not aware of. That could be true. Or it could also be true that it's simply a vanity title.
Do you think that AEW in general, Tony Khan and the Bucks and Punk and the whole situation that happened, do you think that they kind of dropped the ball by not fixing things, and let's turn this into a story for our TV since it's already
Well,
happened?
I think that's obvious. You know, it's a mess, and I think in many ways AEW is still trying to recover from some of those mistakes and those unfortunate circumstances. And really don't want to be critical of Tony Khan, but I
Mhm.
have to be honest at the same time. It was mismanagement.
Yeah.
And again, I cut Tony some slack because he's learning on the job, just like I did. You know, I made a lot of mistakes. I was learning. I had never been the president of a company before. I had never had 200 people working for me before. I had never had the kind of responsibility that I had when I was president of WCW, particularly working for, because I was an employee of TBS and TNT. Tony's not. Tony's an employee of Tony Khan. I was an employee of a publicly held, very valuable, one of the largest media companies in the world at that time. And being a part of a corporate environment is in and of itself a learning experience. It's not the same thing as running your own business. It's a much, much different world with different kinds of pressures and parameters and obligations and ways of doing things. And all of those things were new to me, and I had to learn. And along the way of learning, I got some things really right and I got some things really wrong.
Right.
So when I see what Tony's going through right now, I actually have a fair amount of empathy for him because, in a way, I was there and I
Mhm.
understand what he's going through. I'm hoping that Tony Khan learns from this. You know, there's a saying, I'm sure you've heard it, that doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Um,
Well, let's hope that that's true. And let's hope that Tony learns from some of the things that have happened over the last year or two. And let's hope that it makes him stronger and he learns from it and grows.
And you think that if they would have brought that storyline to TV, it would have worked?
What
If they would have
storyline is
split
that?
it? Well, it would be like, the Punk and, let's say, CM Punk and the Young Bucks and Omega working together on TV after
Oh, I think
what happened.
the potential was
The
certainly
potential.
there because, anytime that you have real life conflict, where, and especially when the audience knows about it,
Mhm.
it was so public, and with social media now, there's very little that the audience doesn't know. Doesn't mean that, out of 1,000 people that watch AEW, maybe 20% of them read about all of the things that are going on online and are familiar with all of the conflict that's happening backstage and in the office. A lot of the audience isn't, but many of them are. But anytime you can take real life conflict that the public, your viewing audience, is very aware of, and you can resolve it in a way that allows you to play it out in a scripted manner in a positive way that creates interest and creates viewership, that's the ideal situation. I did it myself with Ric Flair
Mhm.
back
Yeah,
in whatever
that's what I'm
year it
asking.
was.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think it was 98. I'm not sure, but Ric Flair and I ended up in a conflict, and it got ugly, and it became very public. It was written about in the Atlanta Journal Constitution. It was all over the media. There wasn't social media at the time, but there
Mhm.
was the newsletters and the
Newspaper.
websites and all the stuff. It became a very, very public ordeal. But once we were able to resolve our issues, and we did, we then looked at each other and went, okay, how do we make this work? How do we turn this around? And as you may have heard this saying before, it's pretty prevalent in the wrestling industry, but let's make chicken salad out of chicken shit.
Mhm.
Let's take this bad situation and use it in a way that's beneficial for the audience. They get to enjoy it, seeing it play out. and it's beneficial to the company from a ratings perspective. It's a great storyline. There's great interest there. So that's ideal if you can do it. But in order to do that, you have to have reasonable people that want to work together. And based on everything that I've heard and read, that wasn't the situation in AEW. There were unreasonable people that were unwilling to work together.
Yep. So real quick, let's go. Let's take the gloves off of AEW for a little bit. Let's talk about something going on in WWE that I'm really interested in your opinion. Kevin Nash lately has been very critical of LA Knight, somebody that I've heard that you've talked very well of LA Knight, about basically saying that he doesn't see what the big deal with LA Knight is because he's just a copycat of The Rock and Stone Cold, right? So what do you think about what Kevin Nash is saying about that with LA Knight?
Well, Kevin and I are very close friends.
Mhm.
He's of all of the wrestling relationships that I've had over the years that I continue to have, Kevin Nash is still one of my closest friends. And I have a lot of respect for Kevin. It doesn't mean that we see things the same way. And I understand why Kevin has said some of the things that he said because there are similarities, you know, but I don't think that's a bad thing. If you look at the movie industry, and I keep going back to the movie industry because there's some really interesting parallels, but whether it's movies or television shows or books, any form of entertainment, there's really only 7 basic stories that have ever been told. Since the beginning of storytelling time, there are essentially 7 basic stories. But everything we see is some kind of variation of one of those 7 stories. There's very few original characters or original stories that are out there. You can always, if you really spend the time thinking about it and researching it, and you keep an open mind, of course, you can find similarities between all kinds of characters. And I don't see, I don't think that that's necessarily a negative thing. I understand why Kevin does, because Kevin is looking at LA Knight saying, well, he's not original. This isn't a brand new character. This is a derivative, as they say in the entertainment business. It's a derivative of something else that happened before. Well, in my opinion, there's very little that happens in professional wrestling that hasn't happened before in some form or another. So while I understand Kevin, I disagree with him because what matters at the end of the day to me, because I'm more interested in the business of the wrestling business than I am anything else, is it working? Does the audience react to it? Is it gaining momentum? Is it generating revenue? Does it represent growth in interest? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, but in LA Knight's case, I think the answer to all of those questions is absolutely yes. In my opinion, it's exciting. I'm thrilled for him. I have a ton of respect for him. I don't know him either. I've never met him. I hope to meet him someday because I just want to congratulate him. And not just for becoming successful, but he's been at this for 20 years.
Yep.
He has been working at his craft for 20 years and has remained dedicated and has tried for a long time to finally find that character that resonates as well as it currently is. And I think that should be an inspiration to everybody in the professional wrestling industry. If you're a young professional wrestler and you're just on the indie scenes or you're breaking into the business, or perhaps you've been around for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years and you see LA Knight who's been struggling and probably has questioned himself and whether or not he should have made this his career. I'm sure he has. We all do. And when times are tough, you always ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? And I'm sure over the course of the last 20 years, LA Knight has asked himself if he's doing the right thing. But to stay committed to it and disciplined and positive, and then finally find that character and then be rewarded with the kind of success that LA Knight is being rewarded with, I think that's a very inspirational thing. And I hope a lot of people look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, and I feel like the crowd is really connecting. The fans are really connecting with LA Knight right now. But you as as a person that's been in this business and has seen rise and falls of superstars, do you think is it too soon for LA Knight, since now is when he just popping right now? You think is it too soon for him to go after Roman Reigns at this moment? And the story
In,
wise,
in my opinion, yes. And I've learned this the hard way. you know, you learn more, or I've learned more from my mistakes than I have from my success. Trust me. But I think the real art in writing and creating and building a professional wrestling organization is it's such a subtlety, but the real art is in making the fans want to see someone succeed. Make the fans want to see LA Knight become a world champion. Make the fans want to see Cody Rhodes become the world champion. Make the fans want to see who's ever next become the world champion or to become more successful. Making the audience want it, and then making them want it badly, and then making them want it so badly they can't stand it. That takes time. And the longer you can make them want to see it, the more satisfied they'll be when it finally happens. So, in other words, could it be successful pushing LA Knight to the moon because he's got all this momentum behind him? Sure, it could. Would it be as successful as making them want it even more and building on that desire, that aspirational quality that LA Knight's character is bringing to the screen every week, and building that momentum of desire to the point where their fans are just about pulling their hair out? That's when you give it to them. Don't give it to them prematurely.
see, and that's where here we're gonna go into the part of long-term storytelling. I know in my young years watching example WCW, there was not a longer term storytelling than Sting, right?
Right.
When Sting um, he left WCW and he became Crow Sting, and he wasn't even wrestling for a full year. He was just in the rafters and doing all the other stuff, coming down, beating up the NWO until we finally, a year later, he didn't even talk on the mic for over a year, and he had the people invested, right? With that being said, and all that, and you were a part of that big storyline. Where do you see this bloodline Cody Rhodes storyline? Basically, where is it going? Where's Cody going, and where's the bloodline gonna go after it's all said and done? If they are gonna wrestle at WrestleMania 40.
I would be surprised if Cody Rhodes doesn't eventually beat Roman Reigns and come out victorious in this bloodline storyline. We've seen the bloodline storyline kind of become de-emphasized a little bit now because it's hard to keep the audience's interest at a fever pitch for 52 weeks at a time. And we saw so much great storytelling with the bloodline. We saw characters emerge like Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn's been around for a long time. Sami Zayn emerged as a very important part of the bloodline storyline. Look what happened with Jey Uso. Jey Uso had been bouncing around in WWE for a long time. Not really much going on. Had his ups and downs, had some personal issues that got in the way of things. But as a result of the bloodline storyline, Jey Uso is evolved into being one of the most valuable characters on that roster right now. So I think the bloodline storyline served its purpose in elevating a lot of not necessarily young, but talent that had been kind of languishing more or less in the middle of the card. They were very good. The audience liked them. They were very competent and successful in many ways, but they were kind of languishing in the middle of the story, so to speak. And then with the bloodline storyline, all of a sudden, you've got all these characters that have been around for a while that found brand new life. And I think Sami Zayn is probably the for me, the most interesting, because I know Sammy a little bit. I was so happy to see it for him. Same with Jey Uso. But you can't sustain that level of interest for 52 weeks. You have to let that storyline get a little bit of a rest. And we're closing in on the end of the year, right? And before you know it, we're going to be talking about WrestleMania again.
Yep.
You're going to start seeing ads in WWE programming for WrestleMania. It's right around the corner.
Yep.
Starting in January, you're going to hear about a lot of speculation about who's going to get inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame at WrestleMania. Royal Rumble is a big part of what's going to happen. So all of the focus, probably within another month or two, is going to gradually, and then as time goes on, more focused, in a more focused way, begin really focusing on WrestleMania. I suspect that's about the time that you're going to see a renewed emphasis on the Bloodline storyline. And I think going into that Bloodline storyline, Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns will become a more prominent part of the storytelling. And ultimately, that's what I expect to see. I hope to see at WrestleMania. I don't have any inside information, but that's what I think will happen. And I hope and I think that Cody Rhodes will come out victorious, and that will be the end of the Cody Rhodes journey as it relates to his return to WWE.
Story. To finish the story. So you don't think there'll be any other superstar that could be like, maybe not Cody. Maybe LA Knight gets so big that they're like, maybe we're gonna have to go with LA Knight type thing.
I mean, anything can happen, buddy. I mean, you know that. It's the wrestling business, right?
Yeah.
But I think that Paul Levesque, Triple H, he's a student. He's been studying this game for a long time. He's a very cerebral man. You know, his gimmick character for a while was the cerebral assassin. Well, there's a reason for that. He's a very, very intelligent guy. He's also very pragmatic. I don't think he's prone to emotional changes of direction that easily. I think he's more pragmatic in the sense that he'll create a plan, he'll develop a plan, he'll work according to that plan, and he'll see that plan through. Doesn't mean he won't make adjustments along the way.
Yeah.
You have to be that way in professional wrestling because things change, man. Injuries happen, as we've seen in the past. Personal situations can develop. Contractual situations can develop. So many things can change so quickly that you have to be nimble and you have to have a plan B and a plan C. But I really think Triple H will see this through.
Even last year, people were at a point where it was like maybe Sammy could win. You know what I mean? Where with Roman and
well, that's because they were so excited. They were so excited that. And look, let's be honest. If that would have happened, I would have been surprised, but I also would have been excited because that kind of came from out of nowhere, right? If it would have happened, it would have come from out of nowhere that nobody expected. And that's one of the aspects about professional wrestling that I think we don't enjoy often enough as fans is having, even for people like you and I who watch it and grew up with it, in my case, been in the business. I love it when something happens that I didn't see coming.
Yes.
It's like, wow, I never thought that would happen. That's part of my enjoyment of what makes professional wrestling so much fun to watch. I get bored when it becomes predictable. You know, it's one of the things I will see, people often say, oh, you never criticize WWE. You're in the Hall of Fame. You have friends that work there. I've been very critical of WWE before I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. While I was working there, I was critical of the product in many ways. The product was very stale. There was a sameness. Now we're talking about 2017, 18, even into 19.
Your last run with them.
There was a sameness to everything. Nothing felt unpredictable. And now we're seeing more of that unpredictable nature and things that feel fresh. And that's what makes it exciting for me.
You know what? Speaking of things unpredictable, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I have this last question for you because it's very important that, since when you were in WCW, you did have a lot of celebrities actually wrestle. Like Carmelo, Rodman, Jay Leno wrestled you,
Yeah.
right? David
And beat me.
Arquette,
And he beat me.
and he beat you, right?
I got beat by a comedian.
Yeah. So with that being said, you guys made a ton of money doing that, and it was great, great TV. The matches was, let's be real, right? Nowadays we see people like Logan Paul, that we already know Logan Paul is an amazing athlete, right? But Bad Bunny, a rapper from Puerto Rico, how do you see the way he's actually been in the business, and how does he work? Because Backlash was something else. I don't know if you remember the match from Backlash, and when he wrestled in WrestleMania against when he was against Miz and Morrison, when he was with Damon Priest as a tag team. How do you see his in-ring work for being somebody that's not necessarily a quote-unquote wrestler?
I was shocked, and I'm going to be very honest with you and your audience out of respect. I didn't know who Bad Bunny was until I saw him. I'm not into hip
Of
hop,
course.
right? It's just not
Yeah,
my thing.
not your thing, of course.
So I didn't know who he was. And when I first heard about him, I Googled him, I went, whoa, and I went, holy smokes. Now I see why they're bringing him in. But my expectations were so low. Like I didn't expect to see much out of him, because often when you use celebrities, even when they used Mike Tyson, which I think was a pivot point for WWE, because it
Yeah,
really launched the Stone Cold Steve Austin, Mr. McMahon storyline, which I think is what really turned WWE around, right? But even with Mike Tyson, Mike didn't get really that physically involved, right? They took advantage of who Mike Tyson was and all the notoriety and controversy around Mike Tyson, but Mike didn't learn how to wrestle. Mike didn't get into the ring and have a match.
yeah,
So when Bad Money was announced and all of a sudden he's going to become part of WWE, and I Googled him and I recognized how valuable he was as an influencer and how popular he was as a musician and the audience that he could bring to the table. And, oh, okay, now I get it. Then I saw him wrestle. It's like, what the hell? This guy worked. I mean, he looked like he'd been in the business for 10 years.
wow.
He was phenomenal. And he so far exceeded expectations of what a celebrity normally does when they decide to become a part of a wrestling event, that he just blew me away. And he set the standard, I think. I think Bad Bunny definitely set the standard for how to use celebrities in professional wrestling. And then Logan Paul comes along. Same thing. These guys are not just showing up because they're celebrities and because they have millions of followers and Vince writes them a check or somebody writes them a big check and they show up and they have fun and they go about their business. These guys are committing, they're delivering, they're holding themselves to a standard. They're training very, very, very hard. They're risking injury. And that to me speaks more to their love of professional wrestling as it does to, hey, I get a big check. Bad Bunny doesn't need the money.
No.
He's doing all right. I think, and I obviously don't know him, but I would guess Bad Bunny just loves the business, because you don't commit to the level that Bad Bunny or Logan Paul have committed unless you really love it.
No, and you could tell by other wrestlers how they've talked about both of them, Bad Bunny and Logan Paul, how if the boys respect them, there's a reason, because they wouldn't just, you know what I mean? I
Oh,
wouldn't think that the guys would be like, oh no, he's legit. Even Randy Orton was talking about how Bunny was training in the performance center and how dedicated and committed, and a lot of the wrestlers are like, yeah, he's really committed, and he put in the work, not just because he was Bad Bunny. He put in the work because he wanted to do what he was doing. You know what I mean?
absolutely. That's why I have so much respect for Bad Bunny and Logan Paul and, celebrities that don't need the money. They don't need to do it. They want to do it. And put it, as you just said, put in the work and take the risks and then deliver, because it's good for them. They're obviously very happy because that was their goal. That was the reason they committed, to have that moment and that experience. The fans benefit because people like me that had maybe low expectations based on everything that we've seen in history, even Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman, they put in the work, but it was limited. They didn't put on the kind of performance that Bad Bunny did or that Logan Paul continues to do, but they still put in a lot more work than anybody else before them. And they delivered more than any other celebrity before them, in my opinion, but not to the level of Bad Bunny and Logan. And they've made a major contribution to the professional wrestling industry because of their commitment, their love for it. And I don't know how you don't have respect for people like that.
Well, Eric, that's great to hear, man. And I just want to say thank you again for being here with us at 100% Wrestling Podcast. We're very grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule. Anything you need here, 100% Wrestling Podcast. If you want to say anything to our Spanish-speaking fans, Latin America, everybody in our podcast, let everybody know where they can catch you, where they can listen to you and all the podcasts that you're in. I myself do listen to 83 Weeks. So let everybody know where they can catch you, Eric.
Well, you can find me on Twitter or X, or as I now refer to it as Twix. I'm at E Bischoff. My podcast is 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff, wherever you get your podcasts. I also have a podcast called Strictly Business that you can listen to. If you subscribe to 83 Weeks, you'll automatically be notified whenever Strictly Business drops. That usually drops on Thursday or Friday of every week. 83 Weeks drops on Monday. But that's where you could find me. And I very much appreciate it and grateful for the invitation, because the Hispanic audience was a big part of Nitro's success. People talk about Nitro and everybody always is the NWO, which is obviously a big part of it. But what people don't realize, and one of the things I'm most proud of, is the luchadors that we brought in to WCW, yes, because that cruiserweight division and the luchadors that made it so successful was one of the things that made Nitro so unique. We had something that the competition didn't have. We had these amazingly talented, high-flying, colorful, charismatic performers that you couldn't see anywhere else. And I wasn't the first person to use luchadors. Paul Heyman, used Rey Mysterio and ECW, but I was the first person to give them a national platform, give them their own division on a regular basis in a prominent part of the show. Because if you go back and you watch Nitros, I typically used the cruiserweight division and the luchadors that made it. I used them what they call the crossover. Our show started at 8:00 Eastern. At 9:00 Eastern, that's where I'd put the cruiserweight division, because that crossover, that time between 8:00 and 9:00, when people are looking for something to watch, I wanted something that was so compelling and exciting and colorful and different and unique. And that's why I always tried to put our luchadors in the cruiserweight division. And I think the luchadors, and so many of them that made it successful, are a large part of the reason that Nitro became the success that it did. And now we see, Rey Mysterio's become a legend, obviously. He's in a class all of his own. There'll never be another one like him. There'll be other talents that maybe are as good in some ways, but there'll never be another Rey Mysterio. Eddie Guerrero, same thing.
You're
Psychosis.
You're actually going to be talking about Eddie Guerrero soon, right? And
on next week's episode, we're going to be talking about Eddie Guerrero, and I hope to have some special stuff there. I don't want to promise anything yet, but I want to talk to some people that were very close to Eddie, and I want to learn some things about Eddie Guerrero that maybe we haven't heard before. So I'm going to talk to people that were close to him and see if I can get them to do a couple of interviews on 83 Weeks and share with us some things about Eddie that perhaps we didn't already know. But yeah.
So to close out, Damian Priest, Latino from Puerto Rico, does he cash in or does he fail his cash in?
Cash in, brother. Come on.
Cash in.
Yeah.
Have the second Puerto Rican World Heavyweight Champion in WWE history.
Man, I'm telling you, momentum is on his side right now. There was so much positive momentum in WWE that I think making a big move like that, no matter how it turns out, will be nothing but a good thing.
Oh, there you guys heard it here first. Bischoff says he cashes in. Mi gente, gracias por estar aquí con nosotros, con el gran Eric Bischoff, una de las leyendas grandes de nuestra industria. La gloria, Mike Dagger aquí para 100% Wrestling Podcast. Dagger out.